Hello, I'm Aneka from Made to Sew, and I'm here with my sister Rachel today.
Hi!
So we're going to be filming another measurement video, and I wanted to do a video that covered more measurements than my previous video that is just the bust, waist and hip. I'm going to be showing you how to measure the majority of places on the body and measurements that you're going to need when you are adjusting patterns. We're going to look at width measurements or round circumference measurements, as well as length measurements, and we're also going to be looking at arms and trousers. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do when you're measuring somebody, or if you're measuring yourself, is you need to make sure that you are standing naturally. You need to stand with your feet hip distance apart, and you need to be natural. You mustn't sort of suck everything in. It needs to be natural measurements. You're going to want to wear a bra that you wear the majority of the time because that can make a massive difference. And then I would recommend wearing some very thin clothing, so either sort of something that's tight like sportswear, or it can be loose clothing, but it needs to be thin fabric so that we're not adding anything to those measurements. Now, when you're measuring yourself or somebody else, you're going to need a few things. A tape measure is very obvious, but you're also going to want to have a piece of elastic or something to go around the waist of the person that you're measuring. This helps us when we're taking length measurements and making sure that the waist is obviously in the same place, that you're taking all of the length measurements down to that same point. The other thing that's useful are some stickers. Now, stickers can be useful when we're taking those length measurements just to plot that area that we want to then measure the circumference of, and you'll see where I use these. If you're measuring yourself, then I would recommend that you do this in front of a mirror. You will want to take the measurement and you'll want to make sure, looking in the mirror, that the measurement is parallel to the floor. You're going to want to make sure by looking in the mirror that your body is natural and that you're not holding yourself awkwardly. It is possible to measure yourself, it just takes a little bit more time than measuring somebody else. Begin by positioning a waist elastic that measures about 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters around your waist, and just tie that snugly, but obviously not too tight. Now, one of the questions I often get asked is, where is my waist? I generally ask my customers to simply put their hands on the waist, and I ask them without letting them think about it too much. Get them to look ahead and do this. And most people will put their hands in the right place. Another way is to position your arms down and just to bend ever so slightly to the side. You should get a bit of a crease at the waist. But what do you do if you're relatively straight through the waist and you're really unsure where your waist is? You're straight from the bust down to the hip, which is the fullest part of your bottom and or thighs. In those cases, I tell people to position the waist where it looks good on them. Stand in front of a mirror and take a look. Position the waist elastic around, and you really want to find a sort of halfway point between your bust and your full hip. That will be the sort of most flattering part for you to be cutting the body if you were to be putting a waist seam in or any detailing at the waist. Now that you know where your waist is, we can begin with our measurements. We're going to begin at the top of the body, and we're going to start by measuring Rachel's neck measurement. Now, we're going to take a measurement around the base of the neck. This is where you would wear a sort of snug neck chain. You're going to want to take the tape measure, and you're going to want to position that around the base of the neck, dipping in between the two collarbones at the base there, just like so. Then you will record that measurement where the tape measures sort of cross over one another. The next measurement we're going to look at taking is the shoulder measurement, and we're going to start by taking the individual shoulder. Now, this measurement starts at the base of the neck, so it's where we took that neck measurement before. We're going to finish taking that measurement not at the end of the shoulder or arm here. If you took the measurement all the way to here, it would look like your sleeve was sort of falling off you. You need to take it where that shoulder seam is going to be. There's two sort of ways that you can find this. The first one is if you follow the collarbone out to the end, you'll get a bit of a bump on the end of the collarbone. And I'm just going to slide Rachel's top off. This is what happens when you're family. And obviously you wouldn't do this to your customer, but it's just to help you see. So the end of her collarbone is sitting about here. That's where we're going to want to take that measurement. The other way is to look at where the crease of the armpit is, and you want to sort of come up in line with that. If I take the tape measure, I would measure just like so. and I would do one on one side and one on the other. I would also make sure that I was standing probably a little bit more in front than I am right now. I would probably be sort of at a 45-degree angle or something like that. So I'm not right in front of the person I'm measuring, but I'm just off to one side. Measure one side, measure the other side, and generally I will take the average because you don't want to have a left front and a right front unless you really need to. Another measurement that's useful for the shoulders is the shoulder width, and we take that on the back of the body. This measurement is going to be from the shoulder on one side, the end of the shoulder that we spoke about a minute ago, to the end of the shoulder on the other side. Now, with this measurement, you're going to want to take it from the sort of center of the shoulder seam, basically. So if I'm looking at Rachel's side on, I would say that the shoulder seam would be, if I divided her neck into thirds, 1/3 from the back of the neck. And that's going to be that sort of shoulder measurement that we took a second ago. And you're just going to take that all the way across the back. And it will sort of fall across the back of the neck area, just like so. Obviously, if I was taking this on Rachel properly, I would stand at more of a 45-degree angle. I probably would even stand sort of just behind her to be able to see this, whereas I want to make sure that it's nice and clear for you to see. The next measurement that we're going to take is moving down in the body. We're going to be looking at the across front and across back. These measurements are taken so that they happen sort of halfway in your armhole here. So about this point here, across the body all the way to the other armhole. The front measurement is usually about 3 inches, which is about 7.5 centimeters, down from in between the two collarbones. So it would be approximately here. And this is a relatively flat measurement. And that would be my measurement for the front. Now the measurement on the back is very similar to the measurement on the front. You're going to be taking it from the sort of center of the armhole all the way across the back to the center of the other armhole. In terms of the distance from the top of the back, if we look at this sort of top vertebrae, it's about 5 inches or 12 centimeters down. And it would again be from the armhole where your sort of sleeve seam is going to be, all the way across just like so. The next measurement we are going to look at is how to measure the bust and also the upper bust or chest. You will ask your customer to raise their arms so that you can pop the tape measure around them. They will then need to lower their arms and just relax. You are going to want to measure the fullest part of the bust. And this measurement is what you see as the bust on a dressmaking pattern. You must make sure that this measurement is parallel to the floor. So you want to check all the way around that it's sitting nice and parallel. When you take all of these measurements, you don't want to be leaving your finger or 2 fingers in between the tape measure and the body. The tape measure should be sitting nice and snug against the body. And you don't want to be pulling it too tight either. It needs to just be snug against the body. You may find it useful to take a front bust and a back bust measurement. If you want to do this, you will need to obviously take the measurement at the side seam. And then you will move your way around and decide how much the back has and how much the front has. Now, where is the side seam? You could obviously put on a snug fitting blouse or top like a t-shirt and check that the side seam's in the right place on your body first and measure from that. You could also try and make sure that that is in the right place on the body. So where is the side seam? Generally, the side seam should pretty much be in line with the shoulder seam, which is about where the back of the ear is. Now, if you look at somebody's side on, you can divide the neck into thirds, and I tend to position my shoulder seam about 1/3 from the back of the neck, which is generally in line with about the back of the ear. And you would just run that line down the side of the body. It can be useful having a front bust and a back bust if your customer is slightly busty or even if they're broad in the back, so that you can see what needs to be added to the pattern pieces. The next measurement is the upper bust or chest. Taking the tape measure, we are going to go right up under the arms here. This is a very snug measurement, and it's a measurement that does not need to be parallel to the floor. So it's right up under the armpit, very snug above the bust, and right up high in the back as well, as high as it can go. I'm going to get Rachel to turn to the side just so that you can see where this is sitting on her. So it's right up high under the armpit, sort of as high as it can under the back of the armpit. And then at the front, it goes over her chest. This is a fantastic measurement to work out if you need to do a full or small bust adjustment. The next measurement you're going to take is the waist measurement. You should have a waist elastic on yourself or on the person you're measuring. You will simply take your tape measure and measure around the waist. Your measurement around here, again, should be parallel to the floor. You should also make sure you're not pulling it too tight, that you're not breathing in, that you're just taking a nice snug measurement. Don't leave the finger in the tape measure around the body. Once you've done the waist measurement, we're going to move down to the hip measurement. And we're going to start by measuring the low hip. Now, the low hip is the sort of fullest part of the bottom and or thigh. If I ask Rachel to turn sideways, hopefully you can see from the waist, what we want to do to start with is we want to measure how far down her hip is. We want to look at the depth between the waist and the low hip. When you're working on a dressmaking pattern, the word hip is what I'm going to be describing here as the low hip. Now, your low hip or hip should be your largest area below your waist. So you need to take a tape measure, but also look in the mirror from the front and from the side to try and find your largest area below the waist. It might be across the fullest part of your bottom. It might be lower, it might be over the top of your thighs. Or it might even be actually might be around your hip bone. That might be slightly larger. That largest measurement is what you're going to want to work from. So I'm actually going to measure down the depth on Rachel from the top of the waist elastic down. And I'm going to suggest that her low hip, is about 9.5 inches. And this is where the stickers can be quite useful. So I would grab that and pop that there. I then can pop my stickers down and take a measurement around, making sure again that I'm parallel all the way around the fullest part. And again, if I was working on somebody normally, I probably wouldn't stand right at their bottom here. I'd stand off to the side and make the measurement. And I would just come out and double check that I'm nice and straight all the way around the body. Now, you might want to actually put the tape measure around yourself first before you plot this depth to find out where your largest bit is, because it might be a little bit lower, it might be a little bit higher. But that's the key thing. We want to know, first of all, your largest point. Next, we're going to take another measurement here, and I call this the high hip. It's halfway in between the waist and the low hip, around the hip bone, but it doesn't have to be. So I would again use a sticker and measure a halfway point and position my sticker on. Then I would measure around this area. And again, another nice parallel measurement. Another little tip for measuring around this area is that you put the tape measure on with the numbers pointing downwards. Because a lot of people will be sort of curving through this area, you want to make sure that you are taking the largest measurement here. So you want your numbers pointing downwards and that part of the tape measure to sit snugly against the body. The top part might be sort of sitting away slightly. And again, I would be working to make sure that this was nice and parallel all the way around. You can put the dots on the other side as well if you want to. Now, why are we doing this? So this high hip measurement is useful for us when you're working with fitted dresses, skirts, trousers, anything coming over this hip area. It's going to give us a point in the middle of the waist and the full hip so that we can see your shape. Some people will come out much quicker to the high hip and then flatter for the low hip. Others will come out more gradually. So it's just a useful sort of plotting point to shape the hip area of the garment. It's also useful to note that you may be larger in the high hip than the low hip. And that's what I was mentioning before about your hip measurement on a pattern needs to be the largest measurement below your waist, because you don't want to be coming back in again for the low hip because it will emphasize your sort of fuller area around the high hip. I hope that makes sense. If you're worried that you might increase in size at the waist or the hip when you sit down, then feel free to take a measurement seated as well. So now we know the depth and we also know the circumference of the waist, high hip and low hip. We're going to go back up to the bodice and look at some length measurements there. Now we're going to take a look at some length measurements. We're going to start by looking at the front length measurement. Now this is a measurement from in between the two collarbones at the neckline here, all the way down to the top of the waist elastic. And ideally this measurement is going to go flat between the bust if you can. Obviously on some people that's easier than on others. Just like so. The back length measurement is very similar. You are going to go from the top vertebrae on the neck here. It should be slightly sort of knobbly. It's more pronounced on some people than others. And that's normally where your sort of very standard neckline would finish, all the way down at the back to the top of the waist elastic at the back. Now, standard would be that the back length would be longer than the front length, but it's not always the case. It depends on your individual shape. Whilst we're still looking at the top of the body, there are a couple of other measurements that can be useful when you're determining where the bust apex is on a pattern. Now, it can be useful to work out how wide the bust is apart. And so for that measurement, you would simply take a flat measurement from the bust apex to the bust apex. I do have a tutorial that shows you in more detail how to do this on a mannequin. Then in terms of determining the height of your bust apex, there are sort of three or four measurements that you can use. One is from the center front neckline down to the fullest part of the bust. And you want to sort of stand maybe side on, have a look front on to really see where the fullest part of that bust curve is. The next measurement is from where your neck would be finishing here, where the neck joins the shoulder seam. So again, think about the proportion of where the shoulder seam is. And you're going to come down to the fullest part of the bust. The other option is from the end of the shoulder, again on the shoulder seam, down to the fullest part of the bust. And the final option is the center front waist. So you're going to need to sort of come down from in between the collarbones. It'll probably be in line with the customer's belly button, finding the center of their body, and then measuring from there up to the bust again. And those measurements are just useful when it comes to plotting your bust apex onto the pattern. I have a series of tutorials that shows you how to do all of this, so I won't cover any more detail here. I will link to those. Now let's move on to taking some measurements for your arms, which is what you're going to need for sleeves. You're going to need to take these measurements with your arm bent. So I'd ask my customer to put their hand on their hip and bend it. Perfect. And I will again often take these measurements on one side and on the other just to check. Normally length measurements are the same, but biceps can be different, and you're going to want to go for the largest measurement. Now, the reason we need to take these measurements with the arm bent is because if we took them with the arm straight and you then bent your arm in the garment, it would be too short. The arm length is taken from that shoulder position that we measured previously. So the end of the collarbone in line with the underarm where that shoulder seam is going to be. And we're going to take that to the elbow. We're going to take one measurement for this part. So the elbow length. This is useful in making sure that fitted sleeves, the elbow's in the right place for you. And then you're going to measure down to just past the wrist bone. And that's where I generally take my sleeve length. It can depend on how your customer likes their sleeve length, where they like it to be. Some people like them a little bit shorter than others, but I go just to past the wrist bone. Then you're also going to need a bicep measurement. And this needs to be taken again with the arm bent around the fullest part of the bicep. And I would check this on both arms. As I said, it can be different. It's usually larger on the arm that you use. So you're going to want to take the tape measure around, again, nice and snug, but not tight, and record that measurement and just make sure that you are getting it on the fullest part of the arm, because you want to make sure that your arm is going to fit into the sleeve comfortably. You can sometimes want to do the elbow breadth, which is around your elbow. That can be useful again if you want to check that is your sleeve going to be too tight when you bend your arm. And finally, the other measurements I do are wrist and hand. So if I can have your hand like that. So the wrist measurement, as it seems, is around the wrist, and it would be around the sort of largest part of the wrist. And that's really more useful for perhaps your knit sleeves or your stretchy garments. Whereas in woven garments, although it's nice to know the wrist, we need to make sure that that sleeve is going to get onto your wrist past your hand. So you will make your hand as small as you can, as if you're trying to insert it into a sleeve. And then we would measure that just like so. And so the opening of your sleeve needs to be larger than your hand to enable you to position your hand into your sleeve. We're now moving on to some measurements that you're going to need when you are making trousers. The first thing you're going to need to do is to measure the length. So you're going to measure your outseam or outside leg length. This is from the top of that waist elastic all the way down the leg to the floor or where you want your trousers to end. That could be the ankle bone. I usually do to the floor and then I adjust my hems accordingly. You're also going to want to measure your inseam. And I generally ask my customer to take the tape measure and to position that into their crotch, right on the inside of their leg. And then again, the tape measure would go down to the floor or the same place that you measured your outseam leg to. Now, by taking both of these measurements, you can then subtract one from the other and it will give you your crotch depth or crotch rise. This measurement here. So for example, if you had, say, 42 on your outseam and 32 on your inseam, your crotch depth would be 10 inches. And I generally find that's the best way to calculate your crotch depth. Another method is that you sit down and you measure from where you are sitting up to the waist elastic, but most of the time I find that this method is sufficient. Now, a couple of other measurements that you're going to need for your trousers. Some we've already done, your waist, your high hip, your low hip, but you may also want to measure your knee and measure how far down your knee is to make sure that that's in the right place. So again, using your outseam measurement, you would measure from the top of the waist elastic down to the knee, and you would get your customer to sort of bend the knee and make sure that where you're measuring is in the right place. And you would then plot the knee. You can do the same for the ankle bone if you want to know where that is on the pattern. Now, again, with the knee, we're going to want to do some circumference measurements. We want to know how far around the knee is. So again, I'd ask my customer to bend the knee slightly and then straighten it just to make sure I'm measuring the right bit. And then I would measure the knee. I would also measure around the thigh and the calf, especially if you're doing a very fitted pair of trousers. The thigh I generally measure up by about 8 inches, 20 centimetres from the knee. You want it to be sort of a fuller part of the thigh. And again, you're going to take your tape measure around, make sure it's parallel to the floor. You can check both thighs if you want to. They can be a little bit different. And I would always go with the largest one. For the calf, I generally measure down about 5 inches from the knee. And I would again measure around the fullest part. So that's about 12 centimetres down from the knee. Again, making sure that that measurement was parallel to the floor. You can as well, if you want to, measure around the ankle if you needed something to be nice and snug around there, or decide on the sort of the base circumference of the trousers. That's just something for you to think about. Now, another key measurement that we're going to do is the crotch all around. So let me show you how we do that. Another really useful measurement for trousers is your crotch all around. Now, this isn't the most glamorous measurement. I would ask my customer to take the tape measure and hold it to the top of the waist elastic in the centre of their front. I would then take the tape measure between their legs, back up the other side, and I would hold it at the top of the waist elastic on the back. Do you mind turning to the side? Just like this. It really isn't very glamorous, but it's a required measurement to make sure that you have enough space in the curved shape of the crotch at the front and the back to work with your figure. So I really recommend taking this measurement when you're working with trousers. Now, a couple of people have asked about the measurements when it comes to making jumpsuits. And really, when it comes to jumpsuits, you're going to want to take the measurements for your bodice, so your bodice length that we did, and compare that to your pattern. And then you're going to want to look at your crotch depth or crotch rise, like we did, compare that to the pattern, and also the crotch all around. Now, another measurement that you can do for sort of swimwear and things is your sort of body all around, and that's just like the crotch all around, but it goes up and over the shoulder instead. Just like with the crotch all around, the tape measure would go underneath the crotch, and then up to the front and up to the back, meeting at the shoulder seam. And that's your sort of body all around measurement, and it is quite useful with swimwear. But for jumpsuits, I would generally disconnect the top part of the bodice and the bottom part and sort those out, making sure that they match your measurements. I really hope you enjoyed this video and you feel a little bit more confident about where you should be taking your measurements. Thank you so much to Rachel for joining in and being a model, and I hope that you will learn something and hope to see you again soon.